Monsieur le Président, même...
Mr. Speaker, even with the biggest deficit in the OECD, here in Canada, we have a higher unemployment rate than the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Japan. In spite of that, the government has taken basically the entire summer by closing down Parliament instead of opening up our economy. Where's the plan to reverse the catastrophic damage that's been done to our small businesses, our workers, and our economy? The Honourable Minister.
There's the plan.
Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker.
Technical difficulty. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the honourable member's assertion, I would remind him that, in fact, Canada's recovery in terms of job losses is going much faster than many of the comparator countries he's outlined. I point to the United States in particular, where Canada has recouped 76% of the jobs that were lost during this pandemic. The United States sit at only 52. The honourable member will know that he's cherry-picking data, because if he actually looked back at our record entering this pandemic, he would see that Canada was on a record run of job growth and actually had achieved its lowest unemployment rate since we started keeping track of those statistics over 40 years ago.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, more proof that if the government tortures the data badly enough, it will confess to anything. But here are the facts from the OECD. The United States has unemployment of 7.9%. Canada has unemployment of 9%. In fact, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK, along with the US, all have lower unemployment than Canada. That is despite having by far the largest deficit in the OECD. This is the worst record around. What will the government do to reverse the disastrous damage it has done to our businesses and workers?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, if anyone is torturing themselves to use the data to make a false point, it's the honourable member opposite. You'll notice his speaking point just a few days ago talking about unemployment's in the G7, but because Canada's jobs are actually recovering more quickly than our G7 comparators, he's dropped Italy from that list. Mr. Speaker, if you actually pay attention to what's going on, you'll see that our unemployment rate is a factor not just of the status of our economy, but of the public health measures that have been put in place to keep Canadians safe. Our unemployment in Canada rate in Canada is about 9.0%. The last data point I saw for the United States was about 8.4%. If the honourable member is so enthralled with the American response to the coronavirus pandemic, I'd ask him to show us which public health measures we should erode for the sake of that extra 0.6 points.
Leader of the Opposition.
Certain political rights are inseparable from the very essence of democracy. Freedom of thought, speech, expression, assembly, and association. Can the Prime Minister tell us whose quote that is?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will always defend political rights, Canadians' rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, all the rights Canadians expect Canadian governments to defend, we will always defend.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Today, Mr. Speaker, but not on Friday. That quote was the Prime Minister's father in a book published while he was Prime Minister. In one generation, the Liberal Party has gone from freedom of speech being the very essence of democracy to this Prime Minister musing about what speech he might limit. In the last week, world leaders have been standing with President Macron and defending free speech. Why hasn't this Prime Minister?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week, like this week, we condemn unequivocally the terrorist attacks in France and elsewhere. We stand with the French people. We will always stand against terrorism, against violence, and in defence of free speech and other rights we hold dear around the world.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, 4 days ago, Canadians were concerned when the Prime Minister seemed to suggest that he would limit the freedom of expression. He wanted to have sensitive debates about possible exceptions while wearing a poppy, a symbol of our freedoms and liberties granted by the sacrifice of thousands who came before us. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is very simple. Does the Prime Minister believe that freedom of speech is essential to a democracy? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I said that last week. I say that again this week. Nothing justifies the horrific violence we saw last week and over the past weeks. Nothing justifies violence. Nothing justifies terrorism. We will unequivocally defend freedom of speech, as I said last week, as we continue to say this week, and as I will say again next week if the honourable member asks.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, President Macron called Premier Legault and thanked him for always protecting freedom of expression at France's side. If the Prime Minister is standing in solidarity, why didn't the French President call him? Does he not realize that he's made a mistake? And will he agree that protecting freedom of expression as guaranteed by the Charter is a must? The Honourable Prime Minister, as I said last week, Mr. Speaker, we unequivocally condemn the terrorist acts we witnessed in France and elsewhere. We will always be in solidarity with our friends in France. We will always defend freedom of expression. We will work together with France to promote our shared values all around the world. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is like a weather vane. He flip-flops on such a fundamental issue. We know that the Prime Minister refuses to stand up truly for freedom of expression. Perhaps he forgets that this freedom is guaranteed by the Charter of Rights signed by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. You're either for it or against it. There's no gray area, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister incapable of defending freedom of expression? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. As I've done 4 times already today, and as I did last week, I can say, and I will continue to say, that we unequivocally defend freedom of expression. We unequivocally condemn these terrorist acts, this violence that's never justified. We will always stand in solidarity with our French friends and all those who defend our fundamental values all around the world. We will stand side by side against terrorism. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Another opportunity to try to get an answer. The Prime Minister is hard to follow. On Monday, he came within a hair's breadth of trying to justify the murder of Samuel Paty and the terrorist attacks in France by saying that the caricatures were provocation and that there were limits on freedom of expression. This morning, he's trying to have us believe the opposite. It's incredible gymnastics contortions here. He's suggesting that caricaturists should self-censor. That's quite a defense of freedom of expression. What is the limit? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said last week and as I'm saying today and have done repeatedly, we will always defend freedom of expression. That is a fundamental principle in our democracy. Our freedom as individuals is such that we must always be there to defend this freedom. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, he never says the same thing except now, twice in a row. The National Assembly and the Premier of Quebec have spoken on behalf of Quebecers, and the French President called Premier Legault this morning. The Premier refuses to sacrifice our values, our secularism, and our embracing of diversity and inclusion. The Premier of Quebec will never leave France hanging out to dry, but what the Prime Minister is doing is undermining our relationship with France. And does the Prime Minister realize that he doesn't speak for Quebec? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, we've been working hand in hand with President Macron for years in defending against terrorism, in defending our freedom of expression and other fundamental values, defending values that are dear to us as Canadians and to the French. We have fought together around women's rights. We continue to work closely with France in defending the rights of all around the planet. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Canadians are worried because of the shortage of vaccines, flu vaccines. Doctors have canceled appointments. Pharmacies have no more vaccine supply. So we're going through a global pandemic, but as if that weren't enough, we now are fearing a flu pandemic. Why was the Liberal government not ready for this reality? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we saw this coming and we ordered more flu vaccines than normal. We are here to reassure Canadians that they will be able to get their flu vaccine, and it's a good thing that record numbers of Canadians are looking to get the flu vaccine. We will continue to procure vaccines for everyone because we know that fighting against the seasonal flu is a very good way of fighting outbreaks of COVID-19 at the same time. We will always be there for Canadians.
Maybe the Prime Minister isn't aware. There are pharmacies that have run out of vaccine. There are doctors that are canceling appointments. People cannot get access to the vaccine for the flu in the middle of a global pandemic. We should have been prepared for this. Why wasn't the Prime Minister's government, the Liberal government, prepared for the reality of a flu season and have sufficient access to the flu vaccine?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we pre-ordered more flu vaccines than normal because we knew Canadians would do the important and right thing and get their flu vaccines. We have seen record numbers of people coming out for their flu vaccines. We will continue to work with the provinces and territories in order to be able to meet this surge in demand because it is a good thing that Canadians are getting their flu vaccines, and I will continue encouraging people to get their flu vaccines, and orders of government will work together to ensure that people are able to get vaccinated soon.
Honourable Member for Calgary.